What if you could point your phone at anything around you and instantly buy it on where else but Amazon?
There's been this research out from the University of Florida that found that people who are using ChatGPT a lot are also starting to speak like ChatGPT.
Anthropic just pulled off one of the largest private raises in AI history, $13 billion, pushing its valuation to a jaw-dropping $183 billion.
What actually happens when AI agents don't just assist workers but actually replace them? Salesforce is experiencing this.
What if a simple cap could turn your thoughts into movement? No brain surgery required.
Would you trust a 15-second check to catch heart failure before an ER doctor does? Digital stethoscope.
Could AI make your annual flu shot more effective?
What happens when your teenager turns to AI for help instead of turning to you? OpenAI just announced a new set of parental oversight tools for teenage ChatGPT users, rolling out in the next 30 days. Good morning, Jeff. I got a riddle for you. What do the words delve, intricate, crucial, and realm have in common?
They're on my kids' vocabulary quiz later this week. I don't know.
I think they're probably not on your kids' vocabulary quiz, but I will tell you that apparently you're likely to start using them if you are a super user of ChatGPT.
Oh, then I must be using them a lot. I'll have to ask my wife if that's true, but super user here, so I've probably been using. What are you saying? Like, what, what do you mean?
Well, so apparently there's been this sort of new research out from the University of Florida that found that people who are using ChatGPT a lot are also starting to speak like ChatGPT. And so like words commonly used by ChatGPT are becoming more popular in the average lexicon.
This is amusing. I love it, but it also feels like one of those urban myths. Like they have, you said, University of Florida. So is there research, like data, like they have some way they actually measured this, or this is just people think we all sound like robots now?
No. This is research backed. So basically, the study analyzed 22 million words from unscripted content like podcasts. Maybe we're part of their data set. I don't know. And found that there was a 75% AI associated terms showing increases post ChatGPT release. So words like the ones we just talked about, delve and crucial, realm, surpass, boast, meticulous, strategically, have all been sort of gaining in popularity post ChatGPT.
This is hysterical, and I wonder if the folks at OpenAI realize that their job was now to shape the English and lexicon and the word usage around the world. That's one of those surprising things you didn't know you were going to be in charge of, and now apparently you have some actual influence on. I bet they didn't see that one coming.
I love it. And I bet that there's now people at OpenAI being like, what words do we want to be the new ones? We're going to start just like seeping into the lexicon. There you go, the seep in effect. We're going to start bringing back old words that never got used in a while and have it be.
Strategically bring back some words that surpass their previous levels of usage.
That's right.
Yeah.
So on that note, Jeff, let's delve into our next crucial topic.
All right, next crucial topic. It's very strategic, this one. Anthropic just pulled off one of the largest private raises in AI history, $13 billion, pushing its, and that's not the valuation, that's the money they raised, pushing its valuation to a jaw-dropping $183 billion. And that's nearly triple what the company was worth just 6 months ago.
183 billion is absolutely mind-boggling crazy. What is driving the surge?
Well, it's interesting. It's a pretty clear growth story. Anthropic now counts over 300,000 enterprise customers, which are accounts worth more than $100,000 and annually. That's like 300 million bucks. It's grown sevenfold this year alone. Those accounts. It's Claude Code Assistant, like the GitHub Copilot rival, the kind of coding agent, is now pulling in 500 million a year and has seen usage grow 10x in just the last 3 months. So, I mean, that's a lot of actual revenue. I don't know where the profitability sits, but that's a lot of revenue and a lot of growth. So I think that's kind of what's coming in.
That's amazing. I mean, we've seen a lot of these like large valuations that we've talked about. They're sort of like pre-product, but this is actually like there's real revenue behind the valuation. It's not just hype.
Yeah. And I think the interesting part too is that, we've talked about ChatGPT maybe owning the consumer space. When people are using it like Google now, it's a verb. Even if you use Claude, you call it ChatGPT. But both of these, interestingly, kind of more enterprise use cases, right? So enterprise customers, Copilot on the code, not the consumer $20 a month pro version, driving a lot of their revenue and a lot of their growth. And so I think, Anthropic leaning into, interestingly, the enterprise side of the opportunity in AI and doing really well there. Not to contrast to ChatGPT, but kind of a very different approach and one that seems to be very successful for them, at least so far.
Amazing. And this is just on the heels of, didn't they just do another raise?
Yeah, that's right. The last raise back in March, so long ago, before all the interesting things that would happen, valued them at 61 billion. So in just 6 months, Anthropic has tripled their valuation. Every business would love to triple valuations in 6 months. That's pretty good. There's a lot of debate about whether we're not if we're in an AI bubble. So I think this is only going to lead to more debates about that. But of course, as we said, real revenue, a real growth in revenue, real growth in usage behind this. So whether we're in a bubble or not, it's clear that at least there's some amounts of money still flowing into the space, and I expect we'll see that continue for at least some period of time.
Amazing. Well, last week we talked a lot about job displacement and sort of we talked about younger workers being displaced. So, what actually happens when AI agents don't just assist workers, but actually replace them? Salesforce is experiencing this. So, CEO Mark Benioff just revealed that the company cut nearly half of its customer support headcount using AI. So, basically, full automation. This is over the last 8 months. They've reduced their support roles from about 9,000 employees down to 5,000 employees.
They let go of 4,000 people, so they've eliminated 4,000 jobs relying on AI to do the work instead. That's kind of crazy.
It is kind of crazy. So they basically said that they now run on an omnichannel supervisor that orchestrates human agents and AI agents working side by side. And 50% of the conversations at Salesforce are now handled fully by AI, up from almost nothing last year. So last year there was all human Salesforce. Now about half is done by AI. And the thing that's super interesting is that the AI agents are actually doing work that before humans were just never even getting around to. So last year they had reported about 100 million sales leads that just never got a call back because there was not capacity for this. Now the AI agents are actually able to respond to every single one. So AI is producing sort of a stronger output than the humans ever could have.
It's interesting that you have kind of both angles of the AI workforce story here, like people being let go, a reduction in jobs, and some sort of business side growth being driven, tasks that were previously not being done now being done because AI is essentially it's a cost effective to do it through AI outreach where it may not have been to do through human outreach. So it's really fascinating that we're getting both sides of that kind of like job reduction and increase in productivity and work being done overall from this one AI story. But I'll be curious to see how this goes because I mean, we know Klarna did this earlier and it they ended up walking it back a lot. So Salesforce out here seeming to have pulled this off and actually done it successfully. But I'll be waiting to see if they start hiring more of these 4,000 people back in a couple months.
I think it's too soon to call it successful. Like their early metrics are that more output is being done, but the quality of the output doesn't we haven't like measured that piece, right? So are these calls actually generating leads in production and the outcome that you want? I haven't seen data on that at least yet. So it'll be interesting to sort of see. And it's definitely a sharp contrast from what we talked about last week when we were talking about automating versus augmenting. This is not augmenting humans. This is automating humans away. And so, it's a bold strategy and we'll see how it works out for them over the next, I guess, couple of quarters.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like we've heard a lot of these stories, and this customer support and low level sales, initial sales outreach kind of stuff is one of the most ripe areas for usage of AI agents. So, not surprising to me either that Salesforce, who probably wants to sell the software that they're using to do this to all of their customers, is early on the board in terms of doing this. And Mark Benioff always likes being the first in to some new category. So I mean, fascinating to see him out there doing it. Interesting results. I mean, that's a lot of work being done. That's a lot of jobs that they've replaced theoretically. And if it holds and they can maintain their value, I'm sure they'll have a lot more growth selling this out to all of their other customers, how they have automated call center. So this is an interesting one.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And of course, there's also the sort of other side to the will AI replace our jobs debate, which is led by, or not necessarily led by, but a proponent for is NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, who basically argues that AI should not translate into job loss. It should translate into higher growth, not layoffs, more need for different types of workers. He says that better earnings and faster growth means more hiring down the line. So we'll see, this is sort of a stark contrast between that point of view and what we're seeing from Salesforce. So it'll be interesting to watch that sort of unfold and see where we end up landing.
Or maybe Jensen's prediction will be right, and Mark will have to go hire a whole bunch of higher end sales reps to follow up on the 100 million leads that they didn't used to call back, and now they are. And I think right now that still turns into a human led process at some point. And so maybe that's the history of automation, right? You automate out the lower level task, and then you bring in higher level productivity jobs. So we'll see.
See?
Well, we'll stick on the business topic for a little while. What if you could point your phone at anything around you and instantly buy it on where else but Amazon?
That sounds extremely dangerous.
Yeah, don't tell my kids that this exists because I get a lot of stuff shown up at my door. But this is exactly what Amazon launched with what they're calling Lens Live, a new AI-powered shopping feature inside its iOS app.
Oh my goodness. So this is like it's like Shazam for stuff. I just can Shazam tells me what song it is, but this is Shazam of like, here's a pair of shoes I want, buy it for me.
That's right. You pan your camera around a room. The AI identifies all the objects in real time. You see a chair you like, a pair of sneakers, a dress, an ice lamp, whatever. It matches it against Amazon's billions of products and shows you a carousel. Now, the dangerous thing, Shazam just tells you what song it is, but Amazon will let you just buy it right away. So that's way more dangerous to me than Shazam. But that's going to be a big buy now button over the objects that you can identify. I think we've all wanted this where you see something, you go, oh, I got to like take a picture, go Google search it later, go image search, try and find out what designer is this. So now you're just gonna be able to take a picture or, live camera around and buy what you want.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like more the agentic experience. It's not just a, Google Gemini, Google Lens type of thing where it tells you what it is. This actually gives you the functionality to just buy it right away.
Yeah, and this is one of the interesting changes in AI that we'll have to see how it plays out. But the business model is different, right? Like Amazon doesn't need to show ads. They don't necessarily have to, they may charge affiliate type fees, but obviously they can't change which product they're showing you when you point at something. They're going to find that product. They're not going to like bid for who wants to be the thing. And so, this kind of direct access to the purchase where they make money on the purchase so they don't have to make money on advertising against the search is interesting. And I think is going to be this interesting question about does the advertising business model pull through into the AI operated world, or do we find other kinds of business models that are maybe a little more aligned between the business and the consumer in terms of your wants and desires? So I found that pretty interesting about this, but it's kind of like a Google Lens, except there's just a buy button on it, which is both exciting and terrifying depending on how addicted you can get to online shopping.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, what if a simple cap could turn your thoughts into movement? No brain surgery required.
That's like a hat?
Like a hat. So UCLA engineers just demoed a wearable brain-computer interface that lets users, including one participant with paralysis, control a robotic arm and an on-screen cursor using EEG signals with an AI co-pilot interpreting intent in real time. The tasks were completed nearly 4 times faster with the AI assistant, and the paralyzed participant finished a robotic pick and place in 6.5 minutes, something they could not do without the AI interpreting the EEG from the cap into controlling the robotic arm. So this is pretty crazy, and it's just like a cap.
I'm still having a hard time wrapping my brain around this. Maybe I need a hat to help me wrap my brain around it. But so there's no implants at all. There's nothing that's like connecting into your brain.
That's right. We've seen some of this with things like Neuralink, right? With more implanted, like, surgical, real involved process. This is just a standard EEG cap. I'm going to try and pronounce electroencephalography, I think. But it's sensors on the scalp reading electrical signals from the brain. And the novelty here is pairing a custom EEG decoder with a camera-based AI that learns the user's goals and helps the system steer what the team calls shared autonomy or an AI co-pilot. So it's kind of looking at the world that you're seeing as well as the signals in your brain to interpret what you're attempting to do, which is kind of an interesting pairing of things. And, I don't know, I like this. I need the cap.
I need the cap. How does it compare to things like Neuralink or, some of these other brain computer interface things we've talked about?
Historically, and still the kind of implanted things like Neuralink are more precise, these brain computer interfaces, but come with real risk and cost, right? You're talking about surgery here, you're talking about in surgery into the brain. This is not a thing. And this is kind of showing that we can now take non-invasive approaches to gathering data plus some AI to augment what we're doing in that space and can close much of the gap for practical tasks compared to the surgical options. So it's hitting at faster regulatory and commercialization paths for some of these technologies that are likely to be available for people using full implanted brain computer interfaces.
And what do you think is like the practical translation? Like who would use this type of functionality? What use cases would they use it for besides me and you who just like to nerd out on trying things? Who else would use this?
I don't think you and I are the target customer, but you can think of so many assistive technologies for people who are have various forms of disability, wheelchairs, communication devices, smart homes where you can control either objects in your home, something as simple as the lights and things we have today, or maybe the disembodied arm robots we've talked about, in the kitchen and other places. So whether you're opening a door, picking up a cut, chopping something in the kitchen, opening an oven, I mean, all these things are really interesting and open the door for a lot of autonomy for people who maybe haven't had it, and in a way that's much lower cost and much lower risk if we can really do it through some of these basic apps. So this is a pretty exciting opportunity, particularly particularly because, again, I think this kind of interface can see a much faster path to both approval and to widespread commercialization and adoption because it's just way easier to implement and way cheaper to do.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's like I can't even start to imagine what the world is gonna look like where we can control things with our brains without having to, like, verbalize it or, like, issue key commands, but it's coming fast. Like, we're
It's coming
almost there.
faster than you think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super wild to even think about it and sort of imagine. It sounds like a sci-fi movie, but the future is here.
Future's here.
Yeah. Well, let's transition to some healthcare related news. Would you trust a 15-second check to catch heart failure before an ER doctor does? An Imperial College London team just showed that an AI enabled stethoscope, it's basically like a digital stethoscope that also records a quick electrocardiogram, EKG, and it can flag three major heart conditions during a standard exam. So it can flag heart failure, AFib, and valve disease. In a real world trial across 200 practices, patients examined with the device were 2.3 times more likely to be diagnosed with heart failure, 3.45 times more likely to be diagnosed with AFib, and 1.92 times more likely to be diagnosed with valve disease over the next year. These results were just recently presented at the European Society of Cardiology Congress in Madrid. So, pretty fascinating. Digital stethoscope.
I mean, it's so weird. The stethoscope is like the prototypical analog thing that every doctor like carries around there. It's kind of like I mean, all the icons for medical stuff, half of them are stethoscopes, right? Like it's just like the prototypical thing. Now you're talking about a digital AI powered stethoscope that's finding stuff. What is it measuring? How does this thing work exactly?
So it's measuring two signals. First is like your heart sounds, just like a classic stethoscope would be measuring, but they're digitized. So you're not just hearing them for whatever this couple of seconds that the doctor has it on your body, but it actually digitizes a file and can analyze it. And then second is a single lead EKG. And so they're securely sent to the cloud where they are running against an AI model that's trained on tens of thousands of labeled examples of what was good and bad. And then it's looking for patterns that a human can often miss because again, like a human is listening to you for a second or whatever and trying to make a real-time decision. This is like sort of a well-calibrated, highly trained model. And then it'll deliver the phone back to the clinician or the result, excuse me, back to the clinician's phone within 15 seconds. So pretty quick outcome.
So I'm going to answer your initial question. Yes, I would trust a 15-second heart check. It seems like all to the good. You're identifying many more instances of serious heart issues. Is there a catch here? Like, is this all positive? Or is there any kind of like any downside to this?
It's a lot positive, specifically false positives. So that's maybe the catch. So they did find that about 2/3 of the patients that were flagged were actually false positives. In this sort of situation, I think being like overly inclusive in the flag is better than being under inclusive. So I don't know that that's the worst thing because even if it was a false positive, there's no bad scenario where you're taking steps to improve your heart health and watching your heart health. So if you're flagged and it makes you pay attention, that's a good thing. But then the other thing that was maybe a more concerning flag for me was the sort of practitioners started to use these things and then adoption rates fell off after some period of time. And so that sort of begs the question of is training hard? Is integrating it into your workflow hard? Is there something about actually using the tech that is challenging? So there's something that's making people drop off. But those were the two sort of negative outcomes of this.
This is such a fascinating one to me in the sense that I think these are the kinds of issues everybody trying to deploy AI, not just LLMs, but interesting AI face, which is like, what kind of false positive, false negative, how does that change when and where I use it? Do I use it on every patient? If the false positive rate is high, do I use it only on patients that have may or higher risk conditions? And how do I integrate it into the workflow so that it doesn't get dropped off, that utilization stays high among practitioners? And so this question of like, for some kinds of models, a high false positive is good. For some kinds of models, it's really bad. And if you know what that is, maybe you have to change when and where you utilize a model like this from every patient who comes in the door. Now I got too many people being tagged and I can't follow up on all of them, to patients with higher risk categories where I'm okay with a slightly higher false positive rate. So kind of understanding the nuance. We're not just trying to say, hey, put this in there and do what it says. It's not, the tools are not at that point yet. But what are the pros and cons of this model? What are the weaknesses? And then how do I think about how I deploy it, how I use it, how it fits into the workflow so that I'm getting the most value out of it without people going, oh my God. I can imagine the doctors going, it's flagging like all these people that don't have an issue. I'm going to stop using it because it's just clogging up my clinic with these people who want a secondary test that are getting a negative result. So fascinating kind of negatives in terms of how you actually deal with that in real world deployments.
Yeah, it's a really hard question because it's like the reason you would use this type of thing is to prevent human error. And the more that you have to do filtering based on some other risk factor or risk assessment, reintroduces the human error risk or challenge. And so it is going to be an interesting thing to sort of watch how different people wrestle with how to sort of decide when to use which tool, because that is to me the thing I would worry about is like I didn't use the right tool in the right time because of some bias I had that if I had just turned it over to the tool, might have caught that bias for me.
Yeah. And what do I do when I see that? Like if I know there's a high false positive rate, how do I tell the patient maybe without freaking them out? What's the follow up? Do I have a way to reduce the bottlenecks further downstream? So now I've identifying more cases, but I'm going to have more people who need a follow up test. That becomes the bottleneck in my system. And so understanding that kind of whole process and how do I deal with it and how do I leverage this to the maximum extent without breaking something else in my overall system? That's a hard set of questions, but I think ones a lot of people will be dealing with.
It is a hard set of questions. I am the communicating false positives to a patient is an interesting thing. It's probably different patients have very different reactions. I had a test done earlier this year where the doctor told me, "Oh, don't worry, this is 70% of the time it's false positive." And for me, I was like, well, I mean, it's 30% of the time it's not. That's really high. I don't like that, right? It's so funny because people probably react so differently to different numbers.
Yes, I'm sure they do, and particularly those who have a good understanding of false positives, false negatives, and those who, yeah, some of us naturally do that kind of inversion of the math in our head. 70% no, 30% real, like, and some of us don't. When we think about these things differently.
Yep.
Well, let's stick on the medical topic and ask a different question. Could AI make your annual flu shot more effective? That's an
Whew,
interesting
I
question.
hope
About
so.
time for the annual flu shot. I'm about ready to put that one on the arm. So every year, health officials have to pick which flu strains to include in the seasonal vaccine months before flu season begins. This is something not everybody understands, but the vaccines are kind of targeted at particular strains, and they got to ramp up production of these vaccines well before we know which strains are going to be prevalent this season. And if they guess wrong, effectiveness can drop dramatically, leading to millions of preventable illnesses and people getting sick or dying from the flu, which is a real thing. So there you go. That's the problem.
So they're like it's like trying to predict the stock market, but with viruses.
Yeah, if we can predict the stock market is very profitable, and here, very profitable for the public health sector.
Yeah.
So this is where MIT's team put out a new tool called VaxSeer. I like that name. That's good. Like a seer comes that uses machine learning trained on decades of viral genetic sequences and lab results to predict which flu strains will dominate and how well different vaccine candidates will hold up against each of those strains. Traditional models usually look at a single mutation in isolation, but VaxSeer uses a protein language model. Think of it like ChatGPT, but just specifically for proteins to understand how combinations of mutations interact, and that lets them simulate viral evolution more realistically.
Wow, that's super interesting. And how does this compare to sort of the incumbent World Health Organization model or process?
So I went through a 10-year retrospective study, and Vaxeer's recommendations outperformed the WHO's choice 9 out of 10 flu seasons for the H3N2 subtype, one of the trickiest strains. And for H1N1, it either matched or beat the WHO in 6 out of 10 seasons. And one striking case, it identified the right strain a full year before the WHO added it. So that's pretty good results.
Yeah, that's not a small improvement, and obviously huge public health impact if this is something that actually gets productionized into how people get their flu shots, assuming people actually get their flu shots.
Yeah, so get your flu shot. It's a good thing. You should get the
Yeah,
flu shot. I know there's some debate about this in the public health world, but yeah, I'm married to a doctor, so I'm just going to go out and say, get your flu
get your
shot.
flu shot.
But this is a huge deal. There's millions of flu infections a year. A lot of us kind of think of the flu as like an annoyance, but for many people, it can actually be a pretty big deal. Hospitalizations, deaths, it puts a huge strain on the healthcare system. And the implications go even further. Researchers suggest the same approach could eventually help predict how drug resistant bacteria or cancers evolve, opening the door to designing therapies before resistances even emerge. Drug resistant viruses, one of the big problems now, we're seeing or more and more viruses being resistant to the kinds of antibiotics and drugs we use against them. As one of the lead researchers put it, Vaxeer is an attempt to catch up with evolution. And if it works, it could tilt the race between infection and immunity in our favor. That person needs to go into marketing because that is a good researcher, but also very good marketing. The race between infection and immunity. I like it. And this is one of those topics we keep coming back to health. And maybe I'm more excited about AI and health as I am anywhere else. But this kind of custom model helping optimize a real world process, not just predicting a token, but saying how do we actually go and take this thing where we got to make a prediction. We always said AIs are great at predicting which vaccine strains do I need to be optimized for, and making it more effective has real world implications. And hopefully, we'll be using this for too long out there to actually help us pick the right flu vaccines every year.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I hope that it's not super far along that we're using this and that flu vaccines become more useful.
More effective.
More effective. Well, in a big change of topics, let's talk about teenagers, our other favorite topic, parenting. So, what happens when your teenager turns to AI for help instead of turning to you? OpenAI just announced a new set of parental oversight tools for teenage ChatGPT users rolling out in the next 30 days. So, what's going to happen is that parents will be able to link their own account with their teen's account, and they'll be able to set content filters and manage how ChatGPT responds to certain types of queries. Most importantly, the system will now also have alerts when conversations suggest signs of emotional distress, and they will sort of let the parents know if the teen is exhibiting signs of emotional distress, and they'll sort of redirect these chats in a different way than previous models would have. So this is super interesting. The thresholds were shaped with input from medical professionals with an aim of catching sort of red flags a little bit earlier and then looping in the parents.
Yeah, this was it was interesting to me to see OpenAI coming into how parents are involved and how their kids use ChatGPT. I mean, I think every parent is a bit I won't say clueless, but like these kids are a little more natural to usage of these tools than many parents, and they're probably a little ahead of the curve for many. And so, putting some visibility of how teens are using ChatGPT in the hands of parents very interesting, and particularly in this topic of emotionally charged conversations, which is not how I think of using ChatGPT, but how many people do ultimately use ChatGPT. We've talked being used in therapy. Was there any kind of rationale for why they're making these changes now? It feels early in a company's life cycle to put this kind of parental controls in place. I would have expected this to take longer. Was there any impetus behind this?
My guess is the impetus was a lawsuit that they're involved in right now, which actually is it's quite tragic. Basically, what happened was that a teenage boy had a longstanding chat going on with ChatGPT. The parents are suing OpenAI, alleging that ChatGPT sort of discussed the suicide plans with this teenager for months before taking his life and actually sort of encouraged him along in that process. And so some of the chats that have been released are really very sad. And anyway, we'll see where this lawsuit goes. But my guess is that these sort of safety tools and protocols were put in place after this lawsuit happened and this case was sort of reviewed. And honestly, like this is a public lawsuit. We all have sort of read some about it and know about it, but I'm sure that they have other indicators of things where they're like, oh, I wish our model hadn't responded quite that way. And they probably see that they needed to put some of these safety protocols in place.
Yeah, and not to lighten this too much, but I do think it reminds me of our very first conversation this week about their unexpected influence on the vocabulary of the public. And I think this kind of when people were building ChatGPT, I don't think they expected people to be users to come in and have like therapist style conversation to discuss. I mean, it just wasn't, they weren't building for that use case. They were building for kind of, replace Google search, basic knowledge, query, talk about this. And so I think they're struggling with how do we, what is the right answer? How do we deal with this? And it's not always clear. I think they struggle with what is the best outcome. Obviously, this is a tragic case and they don't like what happened in this case, but do you want to just tell the user no and leave them without anything or anybody to talk to? I think it's a tough conversation. It's good to see them leaning into the parental involvement. I think that's always a good thing to bring in parents or professionals when someone expresses signs of emotional distress. But this will be, I think, an evolving space to see how well they can protect users and offer the right kinds of advice and guidance in difficult moments.
Yeah, it is. It's a really complex topic. I think I tend to agree with you that it's good to bring the parents in, but the other, side of that is like I'm sure there's a lot of situations where you have overbearing parents and kids who really need privacy and would love to be able to like have an outlet to chat, a safe outlet to chat about something. Obviously, not suicide. I would always want somebody to be involved in that. But if you just have difficult situations and now your parents can come in and be like, oh, if my kid asks about this topic that I disagree with, let me know. So there's also, if you take it too far, I think there's a risk there as well. So getting the right line seems like a really hard problem. And I'm glad that they're facing the problem and trying to tackle it. And we'll see sort of where they land.
Yeah, it's also great that they're involving professionals and drawing what those lines ought to be because I think it'll be very hard. I think they may end up a bit where Meta kind of ended up with their content filtering and controls where they brought in outsiders to say, we need a third party group to tell us what the right rules are because we don't really want to be I mean, we're happy to implement them, but we don't really want to define them because it's not the thing that we're expert at. So they've obviously started that process a little bit, bringing in healthcare professionals to help with this conversation. I imagine we'll be talking about this for a long time, and it certainly, I'm sure they didn't expect. I didn't expect that this would be how people were using. I mean, maybe I should have, but it's not the thing I thought about initially. And I will say, I read a different story this week that was related, but made me laugh. There's somebody whose therapist, they were doing a Zoom session, and the therapist is what meant to turn off their camera and accidentally screen shared, and they were typing the whole thing into ChatGPT and then basically reading answers back to their patient coming
Oh
out of
my goodness.
ChatGPT, and the patient could see it because they accidentally screen shared. And so again, I don't think ChatGPT's makers intended that a therapist would be using this as a resource, for therapists to to deal with patients. And here they are trying to figure out how to not only, eliminate hallucinations when you ask for factual information, but also to deal with emotionally difficult situations and advice. And, it's fascinating to see how both humans interact with these things and find that this is an entity or an experience that they can confide in, and then how the makers of it make it appropriate or usable in that context. So we'll have to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I don't think anybody, probably OpenAI included, thought that people would use it in this way. But the thing is, it's so good, right? That it's tempting to do that. Like, nobody is dying to have a hour-long conversation with Siri about any topic, because when you have a conversation with Siri, it drives you absolutely crazy, right? She's like, "I didn't get that. Would you like me to Google something or other?" And you're like, "No, that's not what I said." And it's frustrating. So, like, that would never happen. But a conversation with ChatGPT, it can feel very natural and it can feel informative, and it like, "Do you want me to research this more for you? Do you want this? Do you want that?" And so it's like it kind of sucks you in because the product is just so good. And so I think that it's actually, maybe they like underestimated how compelling their product would be, that people would start to use it for this type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing in the story I told you about with the therapist screen sharing using ChatGPT, the interview also talked to the therapist, and they said, "Look, I was having a really hard time connecting with and breaking through with this patient, and the ChatGPT was giving me advice on how to do that as a therapist. It was really working." It was until I accidentally showed the patient that that was what was happening. But to your point, like, they were doing it because it was a useful. I mean, you could think they're being lazy and not doing their job, but they went, "Hey, I was really struggling with how to deal with this patient," and just like turning out to a colleague and going, how do I really handle this difficult situation?" ChatGPT was helpful. And so they're kind of victims of their own success in terms of how well it works. And now they're gonna have to figure out how to make it work properly in these unexpected, but maybe quite valuable contexts.
Yeah, well, as long as they don't do it in Illinois, since I think it was maybe the week I was doing this with Charlie that we delved into a story about how that's illegal in Illinois now for practitioners to use AI in therapy. So,
Well, not a, if you're in Illinois, don't do it. But otherwise, you can got it.
super interesting.
Well, that's a wrap for us this week on What the AI. We'll be back next week with more insights, breakdowns, and those just plain old head scratching What the AI moments. Be sure to subscribe and share this episode with anybody you know who's trying to figure out AI in their world. And if you got a question, a wild prompt, or a story we ought to cover, email us at email@whattheai.fm, and we'd love to hear from you and maybe cover your story in an upcoming episode. But until an upcoming episode, Annie, I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message, and we do our best to cover them all on the show.